Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Have you with us for our webinar this evening about understanding burnout and compassion fatigue with Nikita Eglinski. My name is Nicole Imgrund, and I'm the owner and director of Rivers Edge Counseling Center. Nikita is a registered provisional psychologist at Rivers Edge Counseling Center. We're very fortunate to have her. She sees children's, teens, adults, and couples in her practice. She has a special interest in work with couples therapy and 2S LGBTQI plus and gender identity counseling, as well as many other areas of specialty if you look at her bio online. Nikita's approach to therapy is through a person-centered and cognitive behavioral framework. This means that she works through the lens of listening to a client's story and respecting that they themselves have a wealth of knowledge and perspective about their own therapeutic needs. Additionally, Nikita draws from solution-focused brief therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. She has a background in classical music. That was new to me. That was fun to learn about you, Nikita. I'll have to ask you more about that. And experience with the intricacies of cultural diversity. In clinical practice, Nikita promotes a space for clients to feel safe, supported, and heard. Nikita believes in the ability to explore and reflect on our identities without judgment, to ask for help in the ways that we need, and to express ourselves through ways that bring us comfort. Most importantly, Nikita believes that clients have unique and transformative knowledge to offer. With that, Nikita, I'm going to turn it over to you to share your presentation.
Hopefully everybody is able to see this okay. So thank you for the introduction, Nicole. As mentioned, I'll be talking about burnout and compassion fatigue today, and I'll try my best to cover as much as I can with our time together. So yes, my name is Nikita Eglinski. I'm a registered provisional psychologist, and I'm so excited to share some of the knowledge and research I have with tonight's topic. It's a very near and dear interest of mine, as I myself have experienced a lot of the symptoms and triggers that we're going to be going over in today's webinar. And I've also seen many people close to me go through both burnout and compassion fatigue. So if you're in a helping profession or you care for someone close to you, you may find the portion about compassion fatigue interesting because it often gets overlooked and labeled as burnout. So for today, we'll be doing a very in-depth exploration into the topics of burnout and compassion fatigue. Please just keep in mind that with tonight's webinar, it's educational in nature. So there's no actual therapy component to tonight. I'm drawing from extensive research and clinical practice for the points that we're going to be going over today. So the goals of today's webinar are to understand what burnout is, what compassion fatigue is, how the two are related, and what separates them from one another. We're going to be learning about key warning signs, triggers, and symptoms that people may have when experiencing either burnout, compassion fatigue, or both, and implementing strategies on how to treat, prevent, and be proactive for managing symptoms and triggers. So let's start with one way of understanding burnout. Burnout is a state of feeling overwhelmed and exhausted beyond a normal level of baseline functioning for what's typical of an individual. So putting it a little bit more simply, burnout makes you feel as though your physical, mental, and emotional needs are fatigued and you're unable to keep up with your daily routine. Oftentimes, this can come about from prolonged stress or exposure to repeated stress over an extended period of time. This means that people in situations that feel that they are high intensity or intense enough over an extended period of time are more susceptible to feeling burnout. So two researchers named Maslach and Leiter break down burnout into three different dimensions. First is exhaustion, second is cynicism, and third is inefficacy. The exhaustion dimension is described as a decrease in energy, debilitation, fatigue, feeling worn down, and depletion of functioning. The cynicism dimension is described as depersonalization, or the idea of forming negative attitudes, generalized irritability, a loss of positive thought patterns, and withdrawal from social situations. Finally, the inefficacy dimension is described as a decrease in normal productivity, a decrease in mood, and an overwhelming feeling of being unable to cope with typical stressors in your life. So looking at this image, we can see that there's these three dimensions outlined with burnout in the middle. The idea is you can experience any one of these precursors within your life, sometimes one at a time or two at a time. But when all three dimensions are occurring simultaneously, this will inevitably lead to burnout. So what makes burnout such a buzzword these days is the fact that many of us feel a lot of these precursors or dimensions in ebbs and flows within our lives. You may be thinking, one day I feel all of these things at once, and it feels like a landslide of stress, while other days I'm able to manage and cope with this uncomfortability, and I can continue to move myself forward. The thing is, in such a high speed world where everything is quick and it's instant, and that's become the standard expectation, we've learned to adapt to the three dimensions of burnout quite quickly. You may be experiencing all three precursors at the end of the workday, thinking to yourself, I can't do this anymore, I've had enough. And then you drive yourself home, maybe you see your family, you unwind, watch an episode of a TV show or read, and then boom, you feel better. Maybe not 100% better, but better than you did an hour or two prior to the moment. And it's in these moments that we often question whether the feelings that occurred prior to feeling some relief are as bad as they seemed. It can become really easy to downplay your feelings or thoughts as overreacting, not getting enough sleep, or other reasons. And all in all, this will lead to a cycle. So the cycle could look like experiencing burnout, breaking down, and then bouncing back. You could experience a cycle within hours. You could experience a cycle over an extended period of time. For example, you may have a stressor at home that overtakes most of your attention and thought processes. The stressor can become all-consuming and lead to feelings of fatigue, exhaustion, lack of motivation, irritability, and so on. These are some of the symptoms associated with burnout, and it could lead to a breakdown within your life for potential days, weeks, maybe even months before a bounce back occurs. This can often become a continuous cycle for people. So it's the idea of experiencing stressors followed by a symptom, a breakdown of some sort, a way to bounce back, and then you start the cycle all over again. People might find themselves going through the motions within areas of their lives or wondering where the time has gone from one stressor to the next, as your ability to manage the stressor becomes continuous and just a part of your routine. The length of this cycle can depend on a variety of factors within your life, such as the number of stressors, the frequency of stressors, and the severity of stressors. It can also be impacted by your support system, your thought patterns, your coping mechanisms, and your awareness of what might actually be causing these stressors in the first place. For example, some stressors may take longer than others to bounce back from. If you're used to feeling workplace burnout, you might find that that cycle goes quicker. Whereas a new and maybe unforeseen stressor, such as the loss of a loved one, may require a longer period of time within that cycle. To add more depth to our understanding of burnout, it's also important to be aware that there's more than one form of it. One of the most common causes is work-related, but burnout can exist in a ton of different areas in our lives. It can exist in relationships, parenting, and caregiving, just to name a few. It can occur in the facets of our lives that involve us being aware of others' expectations and the expectations that we have of ourselves. When you think of the roles you have within your life, you may find that you feel multiple for yourself and for others. So this may look like you being a student, an employee, a coworker, a friend, a child, an aunt or uncle, a parent, a partner, a caregiver. Um, the point is, we each have multiple roles that we must fill, and this can lead to pressure from others and ourselves. You may wonder, am I a good employee, a good child, a good partner, a good parent, a good friend, or a good caregiver? Am I fulfilling the roles that I'm involved in? And if I'm not, what does this mean for me? Burnout can seep into all of these areas with your life. And if we think back to Maslow and Leiter's three-dimensional properties of burnout, if we feel exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy, we may find ourselves experiencing negative ways of seeing ourselves in these roles. This can continue to pile onto an already heavy, full plate of really hard feelings. When you're in a state of burnout, it becomes more than just feeling overwhelmed and stressed. You feel like you're truly no longer able to function appropriately within each of these roles, and the responsibilities that you may have might feel like an impossible task to complete. So finding a way to manage the expectations that you have of yourself, along with the expectations of others, and how they may see you is important in coping with burnout as a whole. This is a good place to take a step back from just burnout and to also introduce compassion fatigue, as it has many similarities to burnout, but it is distinctly its own concept. The Canadian Medical Association describes compassion fatigue as caring for others and resulting physical, emotional, and psychological impact of this. This can be the result of exposure to stress or trauma, but unlike burnout, the exposure is acute or for a shorter amount of time. Compassion fatigue often leads to similar outcomes as burnout does, with an emphasis on fatigue as a symptom, hence the name. Compassion fatigue is often referred to as secondary traumatic stress, a secondary stress reaction, or vicarious trauma. This all means that you may have been in a situation where you're caring for others, experiencing stressors leading to similar outcomes as burnout, such as Maslow and Leiter's three precursors to burnout. So that exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. Compassion fatigue is more likely to occur in individuals who are in a caregiving role, especially in the workplace. The reason why it's important to outline what compassion fatigue is when describing burnout is due to the idea of roles and expectations within our lives. If we're constantly wondering how to prioritize our responsibilities with each role that we carry, burnout can become a common side effect of this. Even more so, compassion fatigue can become present as well. Both burnout and compassion fatigue present in similar ways, but the key component of compassion fatigue is that it's a more specific experience compared to burnout. Compassion fatigue involves a secondary reaction or a second-hand reaction to stressful situations, often caring for others, that will lead to similar outcomes as burnout. It's very common in careers that involve being put in stressful situations or being placed in a caregiver role. So you may find compassion fatigue commonly experienced by parents, children of older adults, volunteers for organizations, medical professionals such as first responders, social workers, and so on. As mentioned before, we each have multiple roles that we must fill, which can lead to pressure from others and ourselves. These roles and wondering if you're good enough can lead to burnout or compassion fatigue, sometimes both. To understand the warning signs and symptoms of burnout and compassion fatigue, I think it's important to understand the triggers and causes of both. Burnout is not simply an overexertion with a role within your life or trying to manage too many tasks at once. Our two researchers, Maslach and Leiter, explain that burnout will have different factors for everyone. There are situational and individual causes that may cause people to burn out, but a study conducted by these researchers found that there's 6 domains that can cause burnout to occur: workload, control, reward, community, fairness, and values. The first domain is workload. When workload feels as though it's too much and an individual does not feel as though they can handle the expectations of a task, there must be a chance to rest, recover, and recuperate from these stressors. However, when you feel as though you're unable to bounce back from these stressors, burnout is possible. With the second domain, control, Maslach and Leiter found a link between the two. The idea of perceiving an inability to influence a situation, a lack of autonomy, or an inability to utilize resources can lead to disengagement, which can cause burnout. The third domain is reward, and it's been seen to reinforce behaviors. The idea of insufficient acknowledgement, recognition, or reward can lead to feelings of invalidation or lack of understanding. This can be through social reward, financial, or institutional. So a lack of appreciation or satisfaction can also lead to burnout. Our fourth domain is community, and it's related to burnout as relationships with others can have an impact on feeling a sense of support or not. The idea of relationships lacking support or trust, unresolved conflict, or a breakdown in engagement with others can lead to susceptibility to experience burnout. The fifth domain is fairness, which can contribute to burnout due to the idea of feeling as though things for you compared to others are equal. The study finds that cynicism, anger, and hostility can occur in individuals who do not feel as though they're being treated similarly to others and that a social injustice has occurred. Values is the final domain, according to Maslach and Leiter, which is explained as one's motivation towards tasks. When there's a conflict between motivation to do a task, people may find themselves feeling as though their intrinsic values don't match the reason for doing something. This can lead to burnout as people may question why they're spending their time and energy towards a particular area in their life when they'd rather be doing another. On top of these 6 domains, burnout can be caused by pressure, interpersonal interactions, chronic stress, helplessness within a situation, stressful environments, unattainable responsibilities, and engaging in tasks for long periods of time. Next, we'll explore the causes of compassion fatigue because to understand burnout, an understanding of compassion fatigue is better explained. According to a researcher named Brown, the 2 main causes of compassion fatigue are secondary traumatic stress and burnout. This is why when we're talking about the 2 terms, they have so many similar and overlapping areas with one another. Essentially, compassion fatigue is caused by helping others who may be traumatized, distressed, in need of a helping hand, and they're requiring emotional energy from another individual. This emotional energy can lead to secondary trauma, which we take on similar feelings to the person we're helping, and then we can experience burnout. Burnout can occur when we feel as though our actions are not having a profound impact on the situation. So feeling like we're helpless and unhelpful can lead to compassion fatigue. What are the warning signs and symptoms for burnout or compassion fatigue? For burnout, exhaustion physically, mentally, and emotionally are key warning signs. There may be feelings of anger, irritability, cynicism, and an inability to effectively manage stressors or tasks involved in burnout. Specifically, exhaustion, which can look like having to drag yourself into doing tasks such as going to work, cleaning your home, meeting social obligations, caring for others, or caring for yourself. Being cynical, so finding that you have a lack of interest in tasks and becoming negative towards completing the tasks, as well as towards yourself and others. Helplessness, feeling as though you can't accomplish or be productive with tasks, or an overall feeling of being ineffective. Depression, while burnout is not classified as a mental disorder, depression is a clinical diagnosis. If you find that depression sets in, there can be another symptom associated with burnout, and it can be linked to exhaustion, cynicism, and helplessness. Dislike for roles, finding that there's a dissatisfaction at work, home, or other roles you may be engaged in. It can lead to absenteeism and can be a component of burnout. Irritability, when little inconveniences begin to become too much and you notice that you're snappy with people within your life or even strangers, this can be a symptom of burnout. Sometimes irritability can even lead to anger. Feeling unfocused, when your mind begins to wander and you find that you're forgetful, there's a loss of idealism, or there's disillusionment, which is the feeling of being disappointed when you find that something is not as good as you thought it would be. Burnout could be the cause. Having sleep issues, finding that you're having troubles falling asleep or staying asleep can be a symptom of burnout. Having somatic issues, headaches can be a symptom of burnout or the stress perceived from burnout. Experiencing gastrointestinal issues, pain with your stomach or bowels, changes in bowel movements, or nausea can be a symptom associated with burnout. Engaging in substance use, finding that you're using self-coping with food, drugs, or alcohol may be a symptom of burnout. More on the medical side, hypertension. So if your blood pressure is high, and sometimes you find that you're tachycardic, which is a fast heartbeat, this somatic issue may be the result of burnout. And again, on the medical side, type 2 diabetes. This is more obscure, but another symptom of burnout is the increased chance to develop type 2 diabetes. This can lead to an increase in thirst and blurry vision. And finally, absenteeism. This may be another symptom associated with burnout as avoidant behavior begins to occur. Now, the key warning signs and symptoms of compassion fatigue are similar to burnout. However, a significant difference between burnout and compassion fatigue is the time for symptoms to occur. Burnout takes place over an extended period of time. Sometimes burnout can take months to occur. It's the result of an individual being pushed to their full limit with stressors. So if you take this chart, for example, each person has a threshold for stress, which can serve for optimal functioning, and it can lead to a crash. This crash could lead to burnout or compassion fatigue. The difference is, with compassion fatigue, the time a person may experience the stress cycle or symptoms associated will happen much more quickly than with burnout. Warning signs for compassion fatigue can be as follows. Hypervigilance. This is where there's excessive alertness for potential threats or dangers in and outside of work. The idea of always being on and on the lookout. Poor boundaries may look like lacking a sense of balance with your control, that you end up taking on too much. You're stepping in and trying to take control, or you're struggling to leave work at work and taking work too personally. Avoidance is when you cope with stress by shutting down and disconnecting. The inability to empathize and numb is when you're not able to emotionally connect. Experiencing addictions is the idea that you find distractions to check out from other areas and roles within your life. Chronic exhaustion and physical ailments. This is when you're experiencing physical, emotional, and spiritual fatigue, or aches and pains that are exceeding what you would normally expect within a typical day or week that may be busy. Experiencing minimization. This is when you trivialize a current experience by comparing it to another situation that's supposedly more severe. For example, the idea of, well, someone has it worse off than me. Anger and cynicism is when you use cynicism or anger to cope with intense feelings that you might not know how to manage on your own or you may not understand. And feelings of professional inadequacy, the idea of becoming unsure of yourself, doubting yourself, and feeling insecure in tasks that you once felt confident to perform. The Center for Addiction and Mental Health outlines symptoms of compassion fatigue as feeling helpless when observing someone else's suffering, a decrease in feelings of empathy that were once existent, a general feeling of overwhelm and exhaustion with other roles in one's life, feeling disconnected emotionally, leading to feelings of numbness, a loss in activities that you once enjoyed, an increase in feelings of anxiety, anger, irritability, and sadness, troubles making decisions or concentrating, sleep disturbances such as nightmares or night terrors, as well as troubles falling asleep or staying asleep, somatic symptoms such as headaches, gastrointestinal issues, dizziness and fatigue, conflict in personal relationships, neglect of self-care, withdrawal from social settings and self-isolation, and an increase in self-coping strategies such as substance use. So as you can see from the list of symptoms associated with compassion fatigue, there's many similarities with that and burnout. The cause of compassion fatigue is dealing with victims of trauma and exposure to traumatic material, whereas the cause of burnout is stress and overworking. The symptoms of compassion fatigue are headaches, gastrointestinal issues, mood swings, depression, irritability, anger, hopelessness, pessimism, a weakened sense of empathy, or being violent towards loved ones or neglecting them. Whereas the symptoms of burnout are withdrawal, depression, irritability, anger, changes in appetite, difficulty sleeping, and exhaustion both physically and emotionally. Once again, this chart outlines the idea that compassion fatigue can have a quicker recovery time than burnout, as it's more acute, whereas burnout is often gradually developed. One thing to note as well is that there is crossover between these terms, especially in the symptoms you can experience with both. You can experience symptoms from compassion fatigue, such as headaches, and still be burnt out, or you can experience a symptom from burnout, such as changes in appetite, and still experience compassion fatigue. The symptoms listed on this chart are not exclusive from one term to another. Even if you think about gastrointestinal issues being deemed a symptom of compassion fatigue, some may argue that the symptom listed under burnout of changes in appetite could be linked to gastrointestinal issues. The point is, it's important to recognize that these symptoms can give a really good outline towards whether you're feeling one or both of these things, but they're not the defining things for each of these terms. So the question becomes, how do we manage symptoms of burnout and compassion fatigue when they begin to occur? Out of all of the places, I saw a metaphor for burnout on a video from a podcast that I think did a really good job of explaining how burnout can deplete ourselves. The creator's name was Laws, and she explained that to think about burnout as Wi-Fi in your house. You may have a ton of devices hooked up to the Wi-Fi, televisions, laptops, tablets, phones, home devices, smart technologies, and so on. Sometimes when there's too many devices, you may notice that the Wi-Fi becomes slow and it needs to buffer. It isn't operating at a regular speed or running optimally. And this is similar to how burnout works. The devices or stressors within your life may lead to a breakdown in being able to run at optimal speeds. The same can be said for compassion fatigue, but the difference would be the speed at which the symptoms of compassion fatigue occur. To prevent and manage symptoms of burnout and compassion fatigue, we can review the situational factors first. Oftentimes, changes in our lives towards healthier habits can alleviate symptoms associated with burnout. Some healthy habits may look like the ones you often hear. So getting enough sleep, exercise, staying active, practicing mindfulness or meditation, cutting out caffeine or alcohol, taking breaks, avoiding substances, staying connected with others, finding routine that builds upon healthy habits, and so on. This might also look at looking at what your workload is and trying to delegate areas of your roles to other people, whether that's in the workplace, at home, or with relationships. For some people, the roles that they're involved in become difficult to pick and choose what's even possible to delegate to others, or how to prioritize all of these healthy lifestyle changes in amidst the lack of time and energy you may already have. One of the hangups people find themselves in is when they know that they're experiencing burnout and compassion fatigue, and they know that there's something that has to change. Their current routine and ways of managing their roles and responsibilities have led to procrastination in being able to take the time to implement any of these positive lifestyle changes. This is where the importance of expectations and boundaries is crucial within your life. What are your own expectations of these roles? The idea of, am I a good employee, a good child, a good partner, a good parent, a good friend, or a good caregiver? Am I fulfilling the roles that I'm involved in? And if I'm not, what does this mean for me? Where are your boundaries within your roles and what takes priority? For example, let's say you have a deadline at work for a big project that you've been working on. Your child has sporting practice, and your friend asks you to meet up for dinner. In this scenario, you want to go for the dinner, but the other two tasks may take priority for various reasons. You may think to yourself, well, my child's hobbies matter, and they're expecting me to go to their practice. My work project deadline is important towards the expectations that my work has of me, and the deadline is drawing near. But I have also been working hard and deserve time for myself. What would you do in this situation? Where does your mind go if you choose yourself over others in this scenario? The answer that a lot of people will have to the previous question is something along the lines of, well, I'll do what's on my to-do list first, and I'll find time for myself another time. And sometimes that is the case, and it's what's necessary. But if that's your response day in and day out, with all of the roles you have to manage within your life, the sustainability of achieving success through this lifestyle isn't realistic. Operating at a level where everyone else's needs come before your own can further lead to symptoms associated with burnout and exacerbate any negative feelings you may already be experiencing. Therefore, the importance of taking care of yourself is crucial in treating, preventing, and being proactive with these symptoms. There are 3 factors that can set you up for success when managing burnout and compassion fatigue, and they're caring for yourself or self-care, implementing boundaries within your life, and managing your expectations. Self-care often feels like a buzzword these days, where the idea of drawing a bubble bath or going to the spa or having an entire me day is highlighted in pop culture. But self-care is so much more than all of these things. Self-care is the idea of putting yourself first in the roles that you have when it's needed. And it can look like simply saying no to a task, watching a 30-minute TV show, sitting in your car for 5 minutes before going inside, all the way up to the more grandiose gestures such as the spa days, a trip for yourself, and so on. Self-care is what fills your cup, and it makes you feel as though you're doing something for just you and just your expectations. And self-care sets you up to be the best version of yourself. Self-care can enable you to be a better you in all of the roles that you're engaging in. It can seem counterintuitive, especially when your plate is already so full of tasks, but by caring for yourself, you are better able to arrive within your role with more patience, understanding, and energy. Self-care can also model positive behaviors for those around you. At work, if you're engaging in self-care, it models an appropriate work-life balance. At home, if you engage in self-care, it can model to your children how they too can develop healthy habits and the idea of individuality as an important quality to strive for. And finally, self-care can create a healthier version of yourself. Going back to our example of the work deadline, sporting practice for your child, and dinner with a friend, you want to do the dinner with a friend, so why not find a way to incorporate that into your life? It may look like going for dinner on a different day or switching the medium from dinner to coffee if you're strapped for time, but the intent is still the same. You are intentionally carving out time for a social outing that you want to do. This is similar for any things that arise within your life. Maybe you do want to finish the deadline for work above all else because you would genuinely enjoy the project that you're working on. Maybe it's a passion project. Maybe you love taking your kids to sporting practice because you get to watch the joy it brings them. Whatever the case, the idea is the same. Trying to adjust your lifestyle to meet the expectations that you have within the roles within your life can set you up for success in preventing symptoms of burnout, managing symptoms of burnout, or treating symptoms of burnout. With the idea of boundaries, a similar way of thinking can be implemented. If you have a role or task that needs to be done, or a role or a task that you would like to do, placing boundaries in the relationships or tasks you engage in is important as well. Back to our work deadline, sporting practice for your child, and dinner with a friend example. Let's say that you know if you take your child for their practice, you can finish the majority of your work project, and then both tasks are out of your hair. You may want to place a boundary with the friend who asked you to go for dinner, such as, I want to go for dinner, but I cannot until I finish these two tasks. And this is for the better because these tasks will no longer be causing guilt or stress within my life because they will be done. Therefore, I will say yes to dinner with my friend later this week. Placing a boundary in this scenario allows you to still engage in the self-care activity, but maybe at a more appropriate time for you. You are in control of being able to truly know for yourself what you're okay with versus not. By placing boundaries within your life, it doesn't have to look like a firm or difficult conversation. It can simply be following simple goals that you set for yourself or making promises to yourself that you know you want to keep. Each of us has a threshold or deal breakers into what pushes us to our limit. Boundaries can help us manage these thresholds and avoid getting near our upper limits at all. Managing expectations may look like having honest conversations with yourself and those around you. It may look like being realistic with your goals and what your priorities are, being transparent, recognizing that other people may have expectations of you alongside your own, asking yourself questions on how you truly feel about decisions that you make, compromising with yourself and those around you if there are any discrepancies, communicating with the appropriate people within your life, and asking for help if you need it. Your expectations play a role of the way you view your identity and roles within your life, and your expectations can create or dismiss motivation towards tasks, which can propel burnout and compassion fatigue. This is why it's crucial component into setting yourself up for success. So with all of that said, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, so I have my roles within my life. I have tasks within each role. I may start to feel overwhelmed with this, which can lead to symptoms associated with burnout or compassion fatigue. And now on top of this, you're suggesting I think through my expectations, my boundaries, and somehow time manage all of this. Well, kind of. According to Jung, a psychologist from the early 1900s, there are 5 pillars of happiness within a person's life: good physical and mental health, good relationships, whether that be in marriage, friendships, familial, or acquaintances, appreciating beauty in nature, having realistic standards of work and lifestyle, and a philosophical outlook that works towards creating resilience. The idea is you want to have all of the pillars in your life supporting you, and when one of the pillars is in need of assistance, your focus should be on finding support internally or externally. Therefore, you want to ask yourself, am I satisfied with my health relationships, work, connection to the world, and my own personal values. If any one of these 5 areas seems to be neglected, you may need to ask yourself, is there a way to delegate tasks, shift my expectations, or place boundaries? And yes, this does require time, but we're not talking about hours worth of time. It could be a simple 5-minute exercise you do with yourself. I find when you brush your teeth in the morning, it's enough time to think through these areas of your life, and it can serve as a check in with yourself. It isn't time consuming because you're already brushing your teeth, and it gives you an appropriate amount of time for you to think through each pillar in your life. Aside from these suggestions, here are the remaining ways that you can combat and cope with symptoms associated with burnout or compassion fatigue. Psychoeducation, the idea of doing research into what each of these terms mean, how they appear, and how to manage them, which hopefully this webinar has helped with in some ways. Finding hobbies for yourself, which can lead to overall satisfaction and a balance between yourself and the roles that you're a part of. Engaging in healthy relationships outside of the roles you're a part of, such as meeting with friends, joining a club, so you can take your mind away from stressors and individuals involved with stressors. Journaling can provide a space for just yourself to write down thoughts or feelings you may have about situations within your life, which can work to reducing suppressed emotions, and implementing strategies to reduce overworking or overloading of tasks, such as taking breaks, checking in with others, taking mental health days, seeing a therapist regularly, engaging in healthy eating, regular exercising, and sleep routines. All of these suggestions can feel overwhelming, but picture your plate. It may feel like it's overflowing. Maybe you're experiencing symptoms of burnout or compassion fatigue because currently you're recognizing you have a few of the symptoms, but you're not yet experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue. And burnout and compassion fatigue are often deemed the cost of caring. With your plate, think of the 5 pillars. So you have health, you have relationships, you have work, you have lifestyle, and you have values. Then you think of the step-by-step process, which feel like the priorities right now. Is there one being neglected? Is there anything you can delegate? Can you adjust your expectations? Can you place boundaries? Can you carve out time for yourself? There will always be things you can take off of your plate and add in return to make it more balanced. The key is ensuring that you're carving out time for things that matter most in the moment. You are the best judge of your time, your needs, and your wants. Therefore, you have the final say where you pour your time and energy towards. Basically, you're the expert and you will know yourself best. Sometimes feeling as though they're overwhelming and adding on to an already full plate, that some of you may have ideas in changing your mindset or lifestyle and so on can feel like it's more trouble than it's worth. But the biggest piece to keep in mind is that we each experience hardships and stressors within our lives, often pushing us to the upper limits that we may have, but we also have resilience within ourselves to find empowerment in knowing we're able to withstand a lot of really difficult, sometimes unimaginable things. This webinar's purpose has been to shed light into hopefully helping you understand what burnout and compassion fatigue are, how to recognize the warning signs, and preventing and managing symptoms of both. The information within this webinar are merely suggestions, and my hope that the takeaway of this discussion is that you yourself know that while the cost of caring can sometimes lead to these negative symptoms, you are the one that has the power to make the smallest of changes. And each of these reframing moments can set yourself up for a lifetime of success. So I would like to end on this quote because I think it's very powerful in considering the terms from today. So psychological resilience refers to the ability to use personal qualities to withstand pressure. I think that this is really beautiful. We each have resiliency from our personal qualities that can help us withstand internal and external pressures around us. And with that, my webinar comes to a close. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Nikita. That was so informative. Just an awesome webinar. We appreciate that. You covered a lot of ground in a short time, but you made it really digestible. Thank you so much. We'll have a few moments for comments and questions, but some of you may need to log off. So before we go there, I just want to thank you again for joining us, and we hope we'll see you at another webinar soon.